Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Friday's Chamber's Pulse on Policy series. Glad everybody could make it. I'm Laura Huffman, and I'm the proud president and CEO of the Austin Chamber of Commerce. You know this, the building community is more than just buildings. Our business community in Austin is a sum of all of our business leaders, our workforce, and our customers. In other words, the business community is the community. And now more than ever, the Chamber is here to make sure that business and the leaders, workforce, and customers that entails succeed. Simply put, the Chamber is here to help people live, work, and thrive in Austin. We're all here for a reason. I'm excited to have Representative Cole, who's an old friend of mine, Chairwoman Collier, and Senator West with us today, representing the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. The Texas Legislative Black Caucus was formed in 1973 and originally consisted of 8 members. Today, the TxLBC is composed of 17 members of the Texas House of Representatives and 2 senators of the Texas Senate, committed to addressing the issues African Americans face across the state of Texas. This is an important conversation. I want to thank our pivotal partners, Amazon, Ascension Seton, Dell, PIMCO, and Wells Fargo. And our foundation partners, Bank of America, Downtown Austin Alliance, the Home Depot, Jacobs, Samsung, and St. David's Healthcare. And we've got lots of corporate partners who help us do our work day in and day out, thanks to everyone on this list. And special thanks to our presenting sponsor, Dell Technology. Our corporate sustainers, you can see the list here, Amazon HNTB and Texas Gas Services. Thank you to our capital sustainers, Accenture, Ascension Seton, Dell again, and Silicon Labs. And of course, our supporting sustainers, ACOM, Austin Community College, Metro, Google, HDR, and Lock Lord. Now, so that we can save as much time as possible for our important conversation, I want to introduce to you a wonderful chamber leader and a good friend, John Howard. John is the Director of Government Affairs with Dell Technologies. He has 3 decades of experience. This makes him probably a very tired guy in federal, state, and private sectors, providing legal, policy, and strategic counsel to leading businesses and organizations. John serves on the Austin Chamber's Government Relations Council, where in 2019, he was named Volunteer of the Year for Federal Advocacy. John, we appreciate everything you do for the organization, and I will now turn it over to you.
Super. Thanks, Laura, and good morning, everybody. As a proud Austin-born company, Dell Technologies and our 16,000 Austin area team members are active in civic engagement and supporting our public policy priorities, which include broadband access and digital inclusion, improved education and workforce training opportunities, and diversity, inclusion, and equity. Today, it's my honor to introduce our distinguished panelists and our moderator. First, Representative Cheryl Cole. She got her start in public life, stepping up in her local PTA and organizing community support for our schools as one of the chairs of the AISD Bond Committee in 2004. She was elected to the Austin City Council for 3 terms. She ultimately served as Austin's first African-American mayor pro tem. Today, she proudly represents the communities of East Austin, Manor, and Pflugerville in the Texas House. She serves as the vice chair of the House Administration Committee and on the Ways and Means Committee and the Agriculture and Livestock Committee. Chairwoman Nicole Collier is the first woman to represent House District 95 in Tarrant County, and in November 2020, she was reelected to her 5th term. She's been reappointed to serve as the chair of the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee, which makes her the first woman in Texas history to serve in that capacity since the committee's formation in 1879. She also serves on the Public Health Committee, and this year she's been elected to serve as the chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. Senator Royce West was first elected to the Texas Senate in 1992 where he has represented the 23rd Senatorial District on behalf of the citizens of Dallas County. During his tenure, he has received a host of accolades, including being named by Texas Monthly as one of the 25 most powerful people in Texas politics, named to the magazine's 10 best legislators, and many more honors. He's the vice chair of the Senate Higher Education Committee, is a member of the Committees on Education, Finance, and Transportation, and serves on the Senate Select Committee on Redistricting, which is where his attention in a few minutes will be drawn. Our moderator this morning is Nicole Mead, who serves on the Austin Chamber Board and is an attorney with the law firm of Hush Blackwell here in Austin. Her practice focuses on representation of clients before state and local government agencies on real estate development, procurement, and economic development matters. Nicole.
Thank you so much, John. I understand that Senator West has a pretty hard stop because of an ongoing hearing. So I want to kick off our panel, and I want to ask all of you, Representative Cole, Chairwoman Collier, and Senator West, to talk about the Texas Legislative Black Caucus priorities. But I would like to start with Senator West. And Senator West, if you could add to that, I would love to hear something about the George Floyd bill that you are moving through. But if you could talk to us about the priorities for the caucus as you see it as a start, we'll be able to let you go so you can get back to your hearing.
Okay, I think that overall, and Chair Collier will go over the legislative priorities. She's the best person to do that. But social justice is a big priority for the caucus. And one of the many social justice bills that we have in the House and the Senate is the George Floyd. And in the Senate, it's the George Floyd Law Enforcement Accountability Act. The language in it deals with issues concerning the immunity issue, in terms of chokeholds, in terms of training, in terms of duty to intervene. Those types of issues, plus others, are in that particular bill. But suffice it to say, it's an effort by all of the members of the caucus, which will be articulated by the chairperson in a few moments, to pass social justice bills. The Mike Ramos bill, which is not a bill that came through the caucus, but was filed by Senator Sarah Eckhart yesterday, was joined in the Senate by myself and also Senator Miles. It is a social justice bill. And so we need to make certain that there's a focus on that. We need to make certain that Senate Bill 108, concerning making certain that when a bill is being considered, we look at whether or not there is a quote unquote racial disparity, racial impact disparity analysis that's done to determine what impact it will have on disparate impact on African Americans and Latinos in the state of Texas. Obviously, there's the issue that we're focusing on in the Senate also concerning Medicaid expansion. It makes no sense, business community whatsoever, for us not to take advantage, at least for the next couple of years, of a 95-5 split down in terms of monies coming in from the federal government. What that basically means that if we expand Medicaid to others, about a million other people, then the federal government will put up 95% of the monies to provide insurance. And you know what the rippling impact that would be. So that's another issue. Higher education is something that we continue to work on to make certain that all universities rise to the top. We also look at the issues concerning public education, where there is a bipartisan commitment to maintain what we did in House Bill 3 last session. And lastly, trying to make certain that your electric bills don't go up. You know what I'm talking about there. So all of those are issues that are on the table. The legislature is finally beginning to, I guess, be going on. I have a bill that has 31 senators on it, where we're going to be providing a process where different types of deed restrictions that basically say that
I'm not hearing Senator West. Is it just me? Senator West, I think we've lost your audio. I think you are not, I cannot hear you. Chairwoman Collier, can you pick up on where Senator West left off about some of these amazing things that the caucus is spearheading to advance priorities for Black population of Texas?
Well, thank you so much, and I truly appreciate the opportunity to be here with my colleagues. Hello, good morning, Representative Cole, and appreciate you allowing us to participate in your hometown. We always are grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with one another. So picking up where Senator West left off, we have a robust agenda for the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. We are working very hard to make sure that people of color, especially Black people, have a seat at the table. And we want to make sure that there is equity in all industries. And so these are some of the things that we're going to be working on. Just picking up what he said, he talked about education. You know, one of the things that we've noticed, and we've been saying this over and over again, is that there's a digital divide. Our students in certain areas do not have access to quality, stable, broadband technology. And so we need to work on increasing that. And so we have the opportunity to work with our rural colleagues to ensure that we expand broadband access. There's Senator West. Senator West, do you want to pick up where you left off? I was just talking about the digital divide.
Well, exactly, the digital divide. We can't keep on kicking the can down the road. And so this session, we're going to be working, as Cheryl Collier said, with our rural colleagues to make certain that we have, number one, a mapping of exactly where broadband and connectivity exists throughout the state, figure out where the gaps are, and then make certain that we use hopefully some of the federal resources as well as state resources in order to put in place a broadband pipeline, if you will, throughout the entire state so people can have connectivity. That's a big issue. And lastly, before I get ready to go, we have got to hold state agencies accountable for what they're supposed to do. Let me give you an example. We had a great meeting with Commissioner Mike Moran yesterday concerning some behavior issues of students that frankly are using cyber bullying and a whole host of other behavioral mechanisms in order to harass children of color in various school districts. But for some reason, we hadn't had the type of response by the school districts that we need. And we've got to make certain the Texas Education Agency, which oversees education that's responsible for educating kids throughout the state of Texas, holds school districts accountable for doing the necessary investigations and providing protection for kids in a quality educational environment that's conducive to them learning. So those types of things. So those are some of the things that I know that I'm working on, other members of the caucus are working on also, Madam Chair.
And are you all feeling like you are getting broad support from the House and the Senate on these issues? To me, these issues seem like issues everybody could get behind, right? Everybody wants every Texan to have an equal opportunity. Are you feeling that there is really a sort of a swell of support from all sides in both bodies?
Let me say in the Senate, as I yes, I think that we're going to have to work on the George Floyd Act because there's some Republicans that don't want to pass a bill with his name on it, and I've got to frankly figure out why and see whether or not I can work with them on getting beyond that. But we've got to make certain that we do in fact pass measures that will protect citizens and have deal with some of the social justice issues.
And Senator West, I'm curious to know, is the George Floyd Act being characterized as police reform as it's being talked about? And I'm just curious about that. Is that how it's being characterized by some?
It's being
It sounds like it has a lot
Be
more
careful.
in it than that.
well, it's sorry. It's being characterized as accountability. Okay, and we do in fact have several law enforcement organizations that are supportive of some of the initiatives in the bill. We've been visiting with the governor's office, and I believe that there's a good faith effort on the part of the governor's office to work with us on this particular bill and other reform measures. So I think that we're going to get some things, and we may not get everything we want. You never get everything that you want, but I do
Right.
believe that we're going to get some reforms.
Very exciting stuff. So, is there anything advancing? I feel like all of the things you all have talked about really do move forward the idea of economic opportunity for Texans and for Black businesses. Is there anything specific to Black businesses that will be moving forward by the caucus in this session?
Well, one of the things that we do want to focus on is making sure that we increase opportunities for Black-owned businesses with contracting with the state. The state has dismal numbers right now across all the agencies, really, and when it comes down to contracting with Blacks. So we need to expand those numbers, increase those opportunities. Senator West has worked on this for a long time, and we are moving the needle forward, but we still have more progress to go. So absolutely, we're working on that. When you're talking about expanding economic opportunities, you can't say that without talking about healthcare, having access to quality healthcare, because you have to have a strong, robust workforce in order to excel. And so, making sure that people have access to the vaccine, making sure that it's distributed equitably, making sure that it goes into those disadvantaged communities that were traditionally disadvantaged. So, these are things that we're working on, even increasing, access to quality education, healthcare. Literally, we could go on, and environmental justice. These are things, when you talk about these concrete batch plants, yes, we need to have improved roadways, but it seems like these concrete batch plants always end up in a Black community or near a disadvantaged community. So we want to make sure that those individuals who live in those communities have a voice and can make their opinions heard when it comes down to that.
That's great. And it feels like the pandemic recovery is hitting our community, the Black community, very hard, Chairwoman Collier. So I completely agree that those have to be the priorities. Can you tell us what specifically can be done about that to make that recovery more equitable?
I think that it's bringing it to their attention. Over the interim, we had members of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus who brought it to the attention of DSHS, the Department of State Health Services, that, look, we need to make sure that you have hubs in the communities where they are hardest hit. And so they started adding more hubs. We started saying, look, we need you to track the occurrence of this condition, the disease, COVID-19 disease, track it, let us know, because we saw that more African Americans were having poorer outcomes when they contracted the virus, the disease. And you know what, that stems from a long time history of not having access to healthy foods and clinics, medical care. All that culminates into, poor outcomes. So, stress, the added stress of not having work, these things all contributed to the African-American people having poor outcomes. So we're going to continue to work on that. I'm just so proud of the collective effort of our members, bringing these things to the attention of those who make those decisions. But you know what? We've got to be at the table. It's not good enough for us to just say, this is a problem. We need more people that look like us at the table when those decisions are being made. And that's another priority of the Legislative Black Caucus.
Representative Cole, I think we have you muted and we need to take you off of mute because I want to hear about your thoughts about Central Texas too. I know you just had a comment, but go ahead. I think you're good.
Am I good? I
Yep.
can't see you guys anymore. I just wanted to add that the other thing we noticed with the pandemic and the African American community is that we suffer more disproportionately with underlying conditions, such as heart problems, diabetes, and it's a special problem when the vaccines or other treatment methods are not allocated to that community, to our community.
So is it by design? Is it just being overlooked? Why is it that they're not being allocated to our communities?
Well, I think it is definitely being overlooked, and we just have a historical problem with by design, with coming to this from a historical perspective, whether it's intentional or not, that's the result, and we need to deal with it and consider it as such. So I would say that it's both from a historical perspective by design and modern day overlook.
And I want to hear Representative Cole about some of the priorities you see specifically for Central Texas. But we have a question in the chat that's really relevant to the health issue that Chairwoman Collier brought up. And the question is whether we can get a status update on Medicaid expansion.
Well, that is a local priority, definitely, and it's a statewide priority because it means so much for the state. Medicaid expansion does, and Representative John Busey is leading on that issue in the Texas House. But we know that there's a good return on investment from Medicaid expansion, and we've seen quite a large amount of Republican support for that, given our budget shortfall. So I expect that will get more traction this year.
And Chairwoman Collier, go ahead.
Just to piggyback on what Rep. Cole was saying, this is an important issue. Ever since there was an opportunity, there was money attached to it, and the state missed that opportunity to get the federal government to pay for 90% of the cost for expanding Medicaid. We know that expanding Medicaid can improve health outcomes for many individuals. And so there has been a push. Representative Garnett Coleman out of Harris County has filed the bill. I've filed the bill. And this year we have, again, Representative Busey, someone else filing the bill. And when I talked to Speaker Phelan, he said expanding access to healthcare is a priority for the House. And so that's good news. That is good news. Unfortunately, we can't just flip the switch because we missed out on so many federal dollars. I just read yesterday that Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher filed a bill that would allow the state of Texas to get some additional dollars if we did expand Medicaid. That's good news. I'm hoping we can get that bill passed at the federal level, and then maybe people will have a better appetite to do what's right and expand Medicaid, which would expand access to quality health care. So these are things that we're working on, and but we just can't flip the switch because it's going to be a transition period. It's not like tomorrow we can go into Medicaid. It's going to be a transition period, but I really believe that we can get to work on starting that process.
That's great. And sort of shifting gears a little, Representative Cole, I want to go back to the question of your priorities specifically for Central Texas. Can you give us some thoughts about the things that you see as high on your list for Central Texas, and in particular, Central Texas's Black business and Black community?
Well, again, for the Black business community, we're still a part of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus agenda of promoting historically underutilized businesses within our community and working with the Black Chamber locally to try to make that happen. As far as other Central Texas priorities that I have, I've found a great number of bills having to do with election accessibility, making elections more fair and open, where you can register by automatic registration for voting and registration by mail, and even trying to make sure that drop boxes are located within the Black community. So these are some of my priority items. And I also have an item that relates to the school districts, which would allow school districts to borrow money from the Texas Public Finance Authority, small amounts of money, so they won't have to go out for bonds. And I know that the chamber has historically been involved in helping the school district with big bond campaigns, because I've worked with the chamber before on this. But sometimes school districts need smaller dollar amounts for computers, or in this case, probably plumbing repairs, and they need to be able to get that low interest rate from the state in an automatic, streamlined process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It feels like, to me, so many needs, so many things that have to be done. I do not envy you guys, but we are so appreciative of having all of you working on all these things that really are going to make or break our state's future.
We really appreciate your support on these issues. The chamber has historically come to help with these issues, whether it's education or actually business issues too.
Absolutely. And we stand ready throughout this session to help the caucus and all of you advance all these amazing initiatives that are really, really critical to all of us as Texans. So thinking about economic prosperity and development, unfortunately, since Senator West had to drop off, I did want to thank him. I know that you all know that he was instrumental in helping reauthorize Chapter 312, which is deals with abatement of city and county taxes on large capital investments. And it really would not have happened without the work that he put into it. This year, it needs to be reauthorized. We need to reauthorize 313, similarly to what was done with 312. And, that helps us as a state attract companies like Tesla to Texas, and then, brings jobs that give us all economic prosperity. Are you all aware of any updates on 313 and other economic development initiatives that might be percolating through the process? Is there anything on the radar?
Yes, I sit on the House Ways and Means Committee. So we've already started some discussions about 313 with the school districts and the phenomenal work that we anticipate that Tesla has done. The rewriting of 313 will be led by Representative Jim Murphy, who sits on Ways and Means and has sit there for a long time. And I think he already has a bill filed on 313, I think he does. And I just anticipate that it will follow the pattern of 312 and come out of committee. But there will be changes and considerable questions having to do with it, especially now because of the pandemic and COVID, and just questions about how it will relate to the overall state budget. But I predict that it will come out successfully. That is the initial read that I have.
Chairwoman Collier, your thoughts about that?
I'm going to listen. The one thing I do know is that I don't talk about stuff I don't. And so I'm going to defer to Representative Cole.
I love it.
I don't know how much I know, but it's still early. It's still early for actual amendments to that bill and what to expect. But Representative Murphy carried 312 last time, and he did a very fabulous job. So I think he'll do a good job this time.
So anything on the horizon or priorities about workforce development, upskilling and reskilling our workforce during all this recovery we're having to go through?
I'm glad you mentioned the workforce, because what we saw during the pandemic is that there was a greater need for reliance on the Texas Workforce Commission agency. And they were underfunded before this happened, and their software programs were not adequate. And we saw this actually fail right during the pandemic when their phone line shut down. They had to beef up staff. In fact, they were asking Capitol members, legislators, to have their staff help the Workforce Commission because that's how understaffed they were. And so we've been pushing, as Democrats, been pushing to make sure that this agency had funding. But the pandemic also increased the need and the push from Republicans. So we worked together to make sure that this agency had the resources it needed to succeed, because the need is great. And so that is something that we've been working on, is making sure that the workforce, because now we've got to rethink how what we're doing. Maybe we look into more technology investments with the workforce. We need to rethink how we do things, allowing people to work from home. One thing that we worked on was not reinstituting the work search requirement during the pandemic when it was at the highest time. And we worked on that, and they listened and they pulled it back. But it got reinstated. But there was a time where we didn't need that. It wasn't going to be helpful for those who had lost their employment. So definitely investing, making sure the education system is preparing the students and the people for the next steps in their lives. So that's always important. And, Senator West was going to his redistricting committee meeting hearing, and that is a very big issue as well. I know, we talked about other things, but redistricting is coming up. We only do it every 10 years. In fact, this last redistricting hasn't even ended. The lawsuits from the last 10 years haven't even really ended, because they're still in appeals. But redistricting makes a difference, because we want to make sure that we have people that are in place that represent our interest. And so we want to preserve communities of interest. That's what that means. Making sure that you as a citizen, as a voter, have the right to select the person of your choice. You don't want to get your voice or your vote diluted by being put into an area where you don't have a chance to have the representative of your choice. So, we want to preserve communities of interest. We want to make sure that people actually have the right and the ability to choose their candidate of choice. So this is something that Senator West is working on. The Texas Legislative Black Caucus has it as a priority. Unfortunately, we won't get the census numbers. Well, actually, it's fortunately, because now we're going to actually count every person in America, which is what we are supposed to do. So we won't get those numbers until September, perhaps. And so the legislature is going to have to come back to work on those numbers.
So interesting. Yes, you're so right. We should be talking more about redistricting, because it is so critical. And Chairwoman Collier, you mentioned something earlier about the broadband pipeline and some work around that to make sure we have equitable availability of broadband in communities. Can you just touch on that just very briefly about specifically what's happening around that?
Well, I want to defer, because I saw my colleague, Representative Cole, she was going to make a comment.
Oh, sorry. I apologize. I didn't see you.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to follow up a little bit on redistricting. There's been some changes on redistricting. The Legislative Committee for Redistricting has added some different members, and there's no longer any representative from Central Texas. So we have to pay extra attention to that committee and what comes out of the committee without actually sitting on the committee. And that's a big news for Central Texas and the chamber to realize that our seats are subject to be gerrymandered even more during the legislative session without having a specific committee member to bring attention to that to our delegation. And I also add that the chairman of redistricting has changed. It's Todd Hunter. It was Phil King. And he has a reputation of being a little bit more fair or moderate in his dealing. So that's some encouragement there with redistricting. And because it's going to have to be considered in special session, we have a little bit more time to hear from the community about their concerns and interests. So I encourage you to be on the lookout for testimony opportunities or dropping card opportunities on redistricting.
And Representative Cole, is the absence of a Central Texas representative on that committee by design? Or does it just happen that way from committee to committee? Just wonder your personal thoughts about that.
That was an on-the-spot question. I have no direct reason to think that it's by design, but it is a considerable absence to be concerned about. So you never want to say that anything was an intentional slight to Central Texas that we need to be looking for, but it's definitely a tragedy that we don't have that representation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so broadband pipeline. I'm very intrigued by that. It's funny that all this came to light as a result of COVID and, realizing that not all families have the opportunity to have their kids go to school on an iPad in their homes, right? Because some people don't even have that infrastructure. So talk to us. I'm curious to know specifically what's happening with regard to that broadband pipeline that you mentioned.
Yeah. So connectivity. That's really important. Is that we have the ability to connect with one another, to stay in touch, because the children. I mean, it was a very huge drop in learning when they had to go remote. Just like adults, children thrive on the connection with human connection, when you have the human next to you, as opposed to just going through a computer and seeing you on the screen. So we saw that the connectivity was a problem. So when they went remotely, they started offering these hotspots. The hotspots, unfortunately, are only as good as the technology that they rely on. So if there are not sufficient cell towers in the area, you're going to have spotty, unreliable, unstable connectivity. And so we can give out hotspots, but if they're not bouncing off towers that would give them a stable connection, they're not as useful. So we need to make sure that our businesses, those who own the cell towers and those who lease the cell towers and those who give it out, that they have sufficient cell towers, that they invest in the infrastructure and make sure that our communities are also connected. So you see some areas that had the fiber optics, some of them have, broadband. We need to make sure that they have the minimum. So there is a commission that the governor has, and we've got to increase those numbers, because my understanding, it's like 25 megabytes is the minimum, is what is required, but that doesn't give you standard, quality connection. So we need these businesses that own these cell towers and that lease these cell towers to improve them and expand them so that our students can have better connectivity.
Yeah, so critical. Very, very interesting. And I know that that's something that the Austin Chamber has always had an interest in and done work to advance. And so please let us know how we can be helpful with that. So there's sort of an interesting question in the chat. So I'm going to read it to you both and see if you want to respond. It says, with the new COVID relief dollars coming to Texas, our $1 billion deficit seems to be gone. Not sure about that, but how can the state use these new dollars judiciously and with innovation for long-term improvements?
Well, there is $1 billion shortfall, and I think the federal dollars that are coming will help significantly with that. Speaker Bonin last time called for a cut of 5% across most state agencies. So there's some talk about it in some of the members of appropriations waiting to see exactly how those federal dollars pan out before we make as many cuts through the state agencies that were going to be required. I am hopeful that we will be able to restore some of those proposed cuts by the state agencies, but it's just too early to tell. The stimulus package also is going to reimburse local entities, which I know the chamber should care about, for some of the funds that they've expended. So that will be a significant help to city and county government.
And absolutely, I was just going to pick up on what Representative Cole said. The thing about the federal dollars is that they come with stipulations. Just like when you get state dollars, they come with stipulations. So it's not like we can just substitute one for the other. These dollars have been earmarked for the most part for certain programs and entities. So the state of Texas is not going to get all of the money that it needs. Neither will our local governments. Like where I represent, the city of Fort Worth and Tarrant County, we're going to get, direct dollars like we've done in the past because of the size of our community. But when it comes down to these dollars, it's not going to be a dollar for dollar and try to fill in the gap, because even when you get more money, it's even harder to try to jockey it to go to different places. I'll give you an example. Our HBCUs, they don't get equal dollars as the regular universities, the other universities that are not designated as an historically Black university or college. And so we still have to fight to get equity for them, like Prairie View and TSU, Texas Southern University, Houston Tillotson here. We have to fight to make sure that they get equal dollars. So even if there is an abundant or enough or just enough money, it's still going to have we're still going to have to try to, push to get them allocated across the board.
I'll also add that the stimulus package has a significant amount of money that will help African-American farmers. In Austin, at times, that is not talked about, but we do have a farm industry in the African-American community that the federal government is trying to sustain and help. And I sit on agriculture and livestock, so I expect that issue will be considered by that committee. And so I look forward to working on it.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. You're absolutely correct. And these family farms are really, I think we underestimate how much of an impact they have to our food supply. So we're getting several questions about voter suppression. And I think the overall question, just sort of summarizing them, is about whether the Black Caucus is foreseeing voter suppression legislation like we're seeing in Georgia and other states being sort of brought forward by anyone? And is there something actively that the caucus is doing to either be on the defensive and ready for such legislation or to combat it? What are you all seeing?
There's some bad legislation out there. One of the good things about this session going so slow is that it's slow, and that gives us a chance to see these bills die. But there is an effort to limit access to voting. I saw in one of my hearings I had at the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee, the Attorney General's office testified and said that the number of fraudulent voting or election challenges and questionable election behavior has skyrocketed, but they couldn't give me a number. If you have more than one, that's a skyrocket, more than two. So there have been more complaints, but they don't equate to actual wrongdoing or violations. So I think that any effort right now to try to diminish access to voting is misplaced. So when you see these bills that have penalties on them, that's a way to suppress the vote. When you see all these other requirements, like, the continuation of the voter ID, reducing the early voting period time, not allowing people to register to vote online solely. These are ways to suppress the vote, and we're monitoring these. One thing that we did as a caucus is that we pushed to make sure that we had a voice on various committees. We wanted to make sure that we had representation on Ways and Means, on energy, on state affairs, on environmental regs. We wanted to make sure that we had people in place on appropriations, so that way when these decisions are being made, we have a seat at the table. Same thing with the ERCOT and Public Utilities Commission. We don't see people of color that look like Sheryl and I on these represented in these places. So we need to make sure that we're pushing for something like that, a more representation on the at the table. That's what we're working for too.
That's great.
So as far as voter suppression goes, yes, we are. I agree with Chairman Collier that we're seeing that, just like we're seeing in Georgia. How much ammunition or legs this legislation has, it's a little early to tell, but we are definitely as a caucus on defensive about that legislation and promoting, as I said before, voter registration, automatic voter registration. And I have a bill that would actually increase the days for early voting. So it would be a month of early voting as opposed to just 2 weeks of early voting.
I'm glad you mentioned that because someone did ask specifically about your bill, a couple of your bills that will deal with voter issues and voter access issues. So I definitely wanted to touch on Storm Uri and what you all foresee, not necessarily just housed in the Black Caucus, but what you all see as elected leaders with regard to how we move forward and what those recovery efforts look like.
Well, winterization is going to be a big topic, and that comes with a hefty price tag. So the real question will be not only what are we to do, but how are we going to pay for it? There's significant talk about the constitutional limits on actually being able to use public dollars for private resources, and recognizing that that can be a problem in terms of the state paying for a lot of these winterization efforts. So that's going to be a big topic. And also, Sylvester Turner filed a bill a few years ago about reserves and having reserve energy at the stand ready in a power outage. And so I expect that we're going to have legislation related to that will have significant legs during the session. And I also plan on introducing a bill or introducing it by amendment. I know that we had significant discussions in Austin about the state capitol lights being on when we had the power outages in Austin, and even the downtown grid having to be on when we had so many outages, and that being unfair. The downtown grid is kind of basically a part of the critical infrastructure at Dale Seaton, so that probably will always stand. But my bill has to do with state agencies being required to automatically have a plan for conservation in the event that there are significant outages. And I just found a bill by Eddie Lucio that I'm going to try to amend to make it required that state agencies look at a plan to implement conservation when there is an outage.
Yeah, excellent. So any final thoughts? Any plea? Well, actually, I did want to ask one other question. Can you all do just a very brief statement, either one of you, about how on some of these issues with COVID, with the way the legislature is operating in this weird way this session out of necessity, can you just kind of describe the mechanism for people to participate, to testify at hearings? I mean, is it, just give us a little blurb about how do we do it?
Well, I think, one of the things you need to do is make sure that you get in touch with your representative. Always communicate with your representative and let them know your opinion on a particular bill. But you can go on to the TexasLegislatureOnline.com and see what bills are coming up and look at the committees for the hearings. We still are open for business. You can come to the Capitol. They're offering free testing for COVID-19 here when you come into the Capitol. You can, my committee, we're still wearing masks in my committee. You're still, so you can come personally, or you can register under the public portal and have your voice, documented. That is something when you see the bill come up for a hearing, if you look at the notice of the hearing, it gives you the link to the public portal. It's being streamed. The committees are being streamed live. So you can still watch the committees, and you can participate by submitting your comments to the public portal, and you'll find that link on the actual notice of the committee hearing.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think people who are not at the Capitol all the time hear about these issues come up and are sort of scratching their heads going, okay, wait, can I go to the Capitol? Can I not? Do I have to bring a COVID test with me? So I really appreciate that, Chairwoman Collier. I think that's very helpful. So final thoughts before we release you to solve the world's issues?
I'll add that there's a significant uptick in virtual testimony. and invited testimony. So coordinate with the state chamber organization to be able to give invited testimony, especially on the business issues that come up and those that will be coming up on 313 in Ways and Means. And I have your ear, you have my ear on that. So we'll be in touch.
Well, the two of you are two of the most amazing, hardworking, incredible, inspirational women. I mean, we are so incredibly blessed to have you both as leaders of our state. Thank you for all you do. And thank you for being here today. I think this is information that has been super helpful to me, and I think to everybody who's tuned in. I think I am turning it back over to Laura Huffman, our CEO, for some final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. And Chairwoman Collier and Representative Cole, it is so good to see you. I just enjoyed that conversation so much. And Nicole, thanks for digging into issues that matter to us so much and helping us to get informed on issues ranging from redistricting to how the Capitol is actually working right now. And John Howard, thank you for being our sponsor of today's conversation. You can see on the screen the events, and be sure to put these on your calendar because you're going to get some great information at these too. And let me just say a final word about Pulse on Policy. We know how busy you are. This is an unusual session by any measure. And so our job is to keep an eye on things for you at the Capitol, make sure that we are representing the business community in Austin. If you want to take a look at our legislative agenda, it is online, but we're bringing you these conversations so that you can get access to the most important information and the most important issues that are coming forward at the state Capitol. So thank you for joining us, and you all have a great weekend.